So today we're going to be talking about some wide receivers that are going to be helping you win your fantasy football leagues in 2024. These are guys that we're not talking about wide receiver threes that could blossom into something. We're probably not buying Quentin Johnston or Treylon Burks. These are guys, wide receiver ones, wide receiver twos, just high upside guys, but that are still going to have a good floor on them. So Nate, who's the first wide receiver you want to talk about this evening?
Yeah, well, whenever you say, hey, Nate, let's talk about wide receivers, the first wide receiver that pops in my mind is the same wide receiver I've been talking about since I started even doing Dynasty fantasy football. Started looking at the stats and trying to talk about what these guys are going to be doing. I've been on the Diontae Johnson bandwagon for many, many years now. Actually, one of the first tweets that I ever had that kind of went quote unquote viral within the community was about Diontae Johnson versus James Washington. There was a lot of debate about which one of those wide receivers was better going into, I believe it was the 2021 season, 2020 season, something like that.
Which one was
it? It was Diontae, because in 2021, he was the wide receiver 8 in points per game, Mike. He had 169 targets, 107 receptions, over 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So he's got a really good ceiling. We've already seen this ceiling from Diontae Johnson, but last year it was not so great. Last year we did not see the kind of production that we have come to expect from Diontae Johnson. The Steelers' offense as a whole was pretty poor. Your boy Kenny Pickett was not the quarterback of the future there, and because of that, Diontae only saw 92 targets last year, only caught 55. That was under 60% of those targets he caught. It was wildly inaccurate. It was not good quarterback play. He had a pretty down season, but Mike, he got traded to the Carolina Panthers, so he's out of Pittsburgh. Now, the Panthers last year, that offense wasn't much better, let's be honest. But Adam Thielen saw 137 targets last year. That's a nice number. I can get behind that number. And Diontae is 1 year removed from 3 straight years of 140-plus targets. So this seems like a match made in heaven. Carolina needed a wide receiver to come in who could take a lot of the volume. Diontae Johnson is ready for that. He is made for that. I think we got a QB upgrade here, honestly. I mean, Bryce Young, former number 1 pick, versus what they were working with over there in Pittsburgh. Diontae Johnson, the catchable target rate last year was 66.7%. That was 70th in the NFL. It was those targets were not very catchable. Meanwhile, Adam Thielen, as much as some people have loved to hate on Bryce Young, Adam Thielen catchable target rate was 81.8%, Mike, 15% better, which was good for 7th in the NFL. 7th. So Bryce Young, maybe that offense didn't do a lot last year, but he's accurate. So Diontae Johnson, Bryce Young, I think this is a match that's going to work out really, really well for fantasy football. Probably more so for the Diontae side than the Bryce Young side this first year. But Diontae, I'm expecting top 24 production from him. Last year, even in a terrible offense, he actually had a career high in, not a career high, but still top 30 in the league with yards per route run with 2.04. So this guy's still got it. He just needs a better situation. He's in that better situation for him. I'm really excited about what he's got going on. He's also accessible right now. You can get him for a 2nd-round pick. I saw trades for 2/3 going to go get Diontae Johnson. Maybe a player like Romeo Doubs, Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams. It is not expensive to get Diontae Johnson, and he's pretty much locked in for 120-plus targets, probably over 140 this year.
Yeah, I love that. And, I like Romeo Doubs. I like Jahan Dotson. And I'm not the biggest Jameson Williams guy. I don't mind rostering him, but I'd probably move him if I could.
Mm-hmm.
I would move all of these guys. I think Diontae has a better path to relevant targets over Romeo Doubs. Jahan Dotson might have the targets, but, we're just kind of questioning it right now. And Jameson Williams for sure. And a 2nd or 2/3 gladly would make that. Easy. I love it. And you know what? On that note, too, if you could get Adam Thielen as kind of a throw-in a trade, I don't mind rostering Adam Thielen. At one point, he was a top 10 wide receiver last year. Good guy to have on a bench. Probably a really good guy to stick in as a nice flex play, or if you got some injuries or something like that. And right now, he's cheap. He's a throw-in. And the catchable target rate, that's something big to look at here as well. The Carolina Panthers kind of remaking their wide receiver room down there. I kind of like what they're
remaking their whole offense. I mean, I'm invested into the Carolina Panthers offense. I mean, you can't do much worse than they did last year. They picked up Diontae Johnson, Xavier Legette, Jonathan Brooks, Javion Sanders. They got a lot of young talent there.
Yeah.
I don't want to call them the Green Bay Packers offense just yet. But I think, 2 or 3 years from now, that offense could be in a really good situation.
Here's my trade target. This is Indianapolis Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. It's only going to his 5th year. In 2 out of his 4 seasons, they had over 1,000 yards, but in 22, he did have 925. And he did miss a game with a quad strain that season. So could have potentially went over 1,000 yards. We don't know.
And his rookie year, he also missed a good amount of time with injury, the first half of the season, I believe.
He did, yeah. And I know we're worried about Anthony Richardson, but look, in the 3 full games that him and Anthony Richardson played together, there was a game Anthony Richardson left early. I'm not going to count that in here. He had 28 targets. So that's almost 10 targets a game. That's pretty big. The connection's there already. He knows that A-Rich knows that this guy's a stud. Like we said, he's occasionally missing time. He's only missed 5 total games in his 4-year career. He was wide receiver 13 and 23. He had 109 catches, 1,152 yards, and 4 touchdowns, 15.6 fantasy points per game, Nate. He's a reliable starter just week in and week out. In a super flex league, he's player 55. That's wide receiver 20. Keep trade cut. He's valued around players such as George Pickens, Kyron Williams, and DJ Moore. Although I feel like that value is a little odd there. I think you could, if you were trying to move Kyron Williams for Michael Pittman, I feel like you might be able to get a little bit more on the Pittman side just because, Kyron Williams' value should be higher than what this is. Here's a straight up trade that I did see. Zay Flowers for Michael Pittman Jr.
Yeah, I mean, I love Zay. I mean, it's hard to move off of Zay, but Michael Pittman, he's got the history of production. I'm a little, I don't want to say I'm worried about Anthony Richardson, but as far as fantasy football goes, I'm a little worried about his effect on Michael Pittman Jr. and also how they spread the ball around because they got quite the wide receiver core there now. So
they do. I'm curious to see. I mean, they have A.D. Mitchell down there, so it's going to be interesting to see what
Josh Downs. Can't forget Josh Downs.
I was talking about the 2 best wide receivers. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Alec Pierce still there as well. Although I think he's going to kind of get pushed back. Here's another one I saw too, Nate. We have Michael Pittman and Jahan Dotson for Jonathan Taylor. Kind of an interesting one right there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that could go to team need. What do you need? Some wide receiver depth, and you have some running back depth already, or do you need a running back to help you win your league?
But if I'm trading Jonathan Taylor, I don't mind getting Michael Pittman in return. But the second player, I'd like somebody that's a little bit more stable. I guess we could use that word if that makes sense.
I guess so.
I mean, look, right now we have to be honest with what Jahan Dotson is, and he's been underwhelming, especially this last year. Hey, in 2 years that trade could look completely differently. So what do you think, Nate? You're out on Michael Pittman Jr.?
I'm in-ish at cost currently.
Okay. All right. In-ish. Very good. Nate, who is your next wide receiver trade target?
Yeah, I'm definitely in on this guy. I think you are as well, Mike. Devonta Smith. And I'm in on Devonta Smith just number one because this is one of the, I think he's actually one of the most talented wide receivers in the league, to be honest. I think the Eagles are so lucky to have this guy as their wide receiver 2. Probably more like the 1B to A.J. Brown than the actual 2 because Devonta Smith is incredible. I had almost 1,000 yards as rookie year with nobody else there. And then since A.J. Brown's got there, he's actually been really good. Since A.J. Brown got there in the last 2 years, 248 targets, Mike, over 2,200 yards, 14 touchdowns. Devonta Smith, I mean, this guy goes from being literally probably the best wide receiver ever to play college football in a single season with his Heisman winning campaign to going, and like I said, almost hitting 1,000 yards as rookie season. And then 14 touchdowns over the last 2 years across from A.J. Brown, continues to find the end zone. In 2022, he had 15 points per game, good for wide receiver 14. Last year, a little bit of a dip down to 14.2 points per game, wide receiver 20. But we know that offense struggled last year, and they needed to make a change. So they brought in Kellen Moore. If there's anything that is predictable, Mike, it's that Kellen Moore is going to pass the ball a lot. And Kellen Moore is going to move Devonta Smith around like he did CeeDee Lamb. A.J. Brown's going to be A.J. Brown out there. Yeah. Devonta's going to be the guy that moves around and is going to be, like you said, the big benefactor from that. Going back to Kellen Moore, Cowboys offense, while he was there, they were number 1 in total yards, including rushing, twice. Number 1 in the NFL twice while he was the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys in his 4 years there. So 50% of the time, they led the league in yards. In his 4 years, he was top 6 in points, except for in 2020 when Dak got hurt. His passing offense has been top 10 4 of the 5 years he's been an offensive coordinator. This guy, he likes to pass the ball. He knows how to pass the ball, and we're going to see a lot of passing with the Eagles. When over the past couple of years, they've been more of a run-heavy team who were pretty good at passing the ball because they had a lot of talent out there. We're going to see a more pass-heavy team, I think, moving forward than we have over the past couple of years with Jalen Hurts. I think Devonta is going to see at least 120 to 140 targets this year, which should set him up for another top 15 finish. And right now, you can get Devonta Smith. I was looking around at trades. You can move Garrett Wilson, and you might be able to get Devonta and a first back, I would love to do that because I think you're going to get actually similar production. Garrett's probably going to have 20, 30 more targets, kind of being the tunnel target over there in New York. But Devonta's going to put up great numbers and get a first round on top of that. I like that. JSN in a second for Devonta Smith. Or how about taking the two Texas wide receiver rookies, adding them together, and going after Devonta, A.D. Mitchell, and Xavier Worthy for Devonta Smith? Some people are going to say, hey, I like to diversify and have my two wide receivers, but man, Devonta Smith is really good. Don't overthink it.
I don't mind this at all. And again, we have a guy that's proven to be a contributor. Also, everything you're talking about here with Kellen Moore when he was with the Cowboys, I think his wheels up for Saquon Barkley as well.
Yeah. I think the whole offense. I think we're gonna have a pretty good year from the Eagles.
All right, Nate, let's talk about my next trade target. And I'm old enough to remember when he was a consensus top 5 dynasty wide receiver, and that is Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf. One of the things that I'm looking for is consistency and guys that don't miss a lot of time and who puts up really good fantasy points per game. And that's DK Metcalf.
Yep.
Missed one career game due to injury, and that was last year, week 7 in 2023. He had listed as a hip strain / bruised ribs, but 10th in the NFL in deep targets, 26th. And that's with Geno Smith not playing as good last year as he did in 2022. And Drew Lock started a couple games too. So RIP. He's had over 100 targets every season. That's with Tyler Lockett being there and newcomer JSN coming along, but DK still gets his targets. He still gets everything that he needs. He's wide receiver 21 in 2023. He had 66 catches, 1,114 yards, 8 touchdowns for a whopping 14.1 fantasy points per game, Nate. And he's still pretty young too. Came to the league younger. He had some medical concerns coming in, but he's been fine. He's been consistent as an NFL receiver. So I'm going to go ahead and get him where I don't have him. He's player 51 on Keep Trade Cut in a super flex league, which is wide receiver 19. He's valued around players such as Kyle Pitts, Jared Goff, and DJ Moore. So kind of an odd grouping. But here's some trades that I saw. Jalen Waddle for DK Metcalf and Isaiah Pacheco. So,
okay. There's a lot of hype around Pacheco. Quiet hype. I don't think it's like the consensus hype.
It's all from me.
But the Pacheco projections look really, really good for this year.
Also, I did see a sleeper alert today that second running back off the bench was Deneric Prince, who's UDFA last year from Tulsa. And if you want to find out more about players like that, like I've never heard this guy before, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. I guarantee you we talked about him last year.
Yep.
On our Patreon. Hate to go, and I guess you could call it a downgrade to go from Waddle to Metcalf, but to add a guy who could push to be a running back 1.
It could be the move that puts you over the edge to win your league.
It really could. And DK's still young enough where he's going to be on your team for a while. So it's not like you're moving Jalen Waddle for Devonta Adams and Isaiah Pacheco. Still a guy in his 20s. Here's another one, a 25 first and a third for DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad trade at all. I don't mind throwing a third on top of a 25 first to go get a wide receiver like Metcalf at all.
Yeah, don't let a mid-round pick hold you back. No. All right, Nate, who is your next wide receiver trade target?
All right, another guy that I talk about quite a bit on this show.
We both do.
And that is Christian Kirk, because I love consistency, Mike. Not so much Diontae last year, which, speaking of pulling this stat with my head, Diontae only had one game with 10 targets last year or more. The year before that, he had 7. So that's how bad that offense was last year. But Christian Kirk kind of fits a similar vibe. He doesn't play outside receiver like Diontae does. He plays more in the slot. But he is the number 1 target for Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars when he's on the field. When he went off the field last year because he was hurt at for the second half of the season, Evan Ingram really stepped it up and was the main target for that offense. Calvin Ridley never really was able to step into that role. But Christian Kirk, when he was on the field for the first half of the season, he was the number 1 guy. They love him down there. And ever since he's moved from Arizona to Jacksonville, he has been great for PPR leagues, been great for your lineup. A lot of times with his cost, he's only going to cost you what you probably would pay for a flex player, but you could put this guy in as your wide receiver 3 because he can put up top 24 numbers. So last year, not so great, but I think we can get back to 2022 numbers from Christian Kirk this year. He finished in 2022 with 133 targets, 84 receptions for 1,108 yards, and 8 touchdowns, Mike. Good for 14.2 points per game. Wide receiver 18 on the season. So Christian Kirk, he might not have that top 12, upside, but I think he's one of the better wide receiver twos, more consistent wide receiver twos that you could ask for, especially with Calvin Ridley moving on. If Calvin Ridley stayed another year, had a second year in that offense, I think he would have taken a bit more of a step forward. But now they're replacing Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis, who comes in. We know what Gabe Davis is. I don't think we're going to see anything different from Gabe Davis in Jacksonville. Maybe if they didn't draft Brian Thomas Jr., the other guy that they added in, who they drafted with a first-round pick. So obviously they have big expectations for him, but it's going to be, his rookie year. He's not going to surpass Christian Kirk as the wide receiver 1 for Trevor Lawrence this year. But next year, it could be all Brian Thomas Jr. It could be Christian Kirk will still get his. But Kirk this year is going to be set up for success. He only played 12 games last year, but like I said, consistent. 6 receptions or more in 50% of the games he played, at least more than one snap, because the game that he did get injured, he got injured on the first play. He had a catch for 20-something yards and was out the rest of the season. Still productive, even when he gets injured. So last year, while we didn't really get what we wanted from Christian Kirk, he still put up good numbers in the first half of the season. Actually had a career high yards per route run with 2.07, which was 19th in the NFL. So I'm expecting top 24 numbers again this year from Christian Kirk, and someone that you can consistently play in your flex spot and get good points out of. And right now you can get him for Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall, who just got put on the injury list because of a hamstring injury. Christian Watson, speaking of hamstring injuries, also someone you could probably move for Christian Kirk. And then if you want to move some draft picks around, a second-round pick might get it done for Christian Kirk. You might need to add a third-round pick on top of it. Or Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is also someone I saw in multiple trades for Christian Kirk. I'm pretty low on Tony Pollard this year, so I would move Tony Pollard in a heartbeat for Christian Kirk. You might have to add a third onto Pollard to make it happen, but I would be looking to make that move.
I will make all of these trades. Keon Coleman, I'm kind of curious to see what he does up there in Buffalo. I mean, just super ripe for opportunity up there for a young wide receiver. I've never been a Ricky Pearsall guy. I probably won't become one at any point soon. And Christian Watson, yeah, I have no problem. Another guy who I think is extremely talented, but just hasn't really shown it to us yet on a consistent basis. The second and third deal, and Tony Pollard in the third. Yes, please, by all means, get Tony Pollard off of my team gladly. So yeah, and I love Christian Kirk as well. Nate, let's go to our last trade target. So look, he's an older guy, but this is a guy that, hey, maybe I'll just be fine with letting him just retire on my roster. And no, it is not Michael Gallup. That's Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Mike Evans. His entire career, he's been over 1,000 yards every single season.
I love the consistency of Mike Evans, like you just spoke about, but I also love watching people freak out week to week about Mike Evans, because sometimes he's inconsistent week to week because he just scores touchdowns, and then like one week he'll have like 16 yards for 3 touchdowns, and the next week he'll have 120 yards at 1 touchdown. I love the consistency of Mike Evans. Great pick here.
Let's be realistic here. You can get a clunker week from anybody in the NFL. I mean, it does happen, but overall, he was wide receiver 7 in 2023. 79 catches, 1,255 yards, 13 touchdowns, which, by the way, those 13 touchdowns led wide receivers in the NFL. 16.6 fantasy points per game as well. This is a guy, he helped revive Baker Mayfield's career last year, and this is all with Chris Godwin taking targets. Rashad White got targets. Kate Otten down there as well. So these guys are all taking targets, really missing time. Mike Evans does not miss a lot of time. 36 deep targets in 2023, Nate, which was first in the NFL.
He is great at getting down the field. People look at him because how big he is, and they don't expect him to be as fast as he is. But Mike Evans, I mean, I think he ran like a 4.4, and he's like 230, 240 pounds.
Yeah, and he's 30, but he did sign a 3-year extension. Like I said before, this player, I'm just going to let him ride on my roster until he just packs it in. So I want to talk about some disrespect here too, Nate. Let's talk about it. He's player 87 on Keep Trade Cut, wide receiver 34, and he's valued around players such as Keon Coleman, who's a rookie with question marks, Will Levis, who's a second-year player with question marks, and Terry McLaurin, who I like, but I think Mike Evans is better. I saw some trades, Mike Evans for 2 seconds, and Mike Evans straight up for Rashee Rice.
I will continue to take Mike Evans. I do want to say he actually did not run a 4.4. He ran a 4.53. Okay. But at 6'5", 231 pounds, which ended up with a 97th percentile speed score. I mean, when you're that big and you run a 4.53, that's pretty impressive. Also, just found out he had 35-inch arms, which is 100th percentile. So we're talking about a guy who's 6'5" and has like super long arms. That's why he's so good. This guy is so good. I can't believe there's even an argument on Twitter about if this guy should be a Hall of Famer or not. Mike Evans is a Hall of Famer. I know there's still some wide receivers that got to get in the Hall of Fame, and maybe we got to talk about the criteria of the Hall of Fame. But this guy deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I'm always in on Mike Evans. I can't buy Mike Evans in most of my leagues because I already have him.
So buy Mike Evans, get him on your roster, help you win the championship. But until next time, everybody, don't forget we're doing a week free on Patreon, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. So until next time, for Nate, I'm Mike. Thank you for listening.